Hello Neovim Conf, my name is Kodiko, and in this talk we're going to look at the Neovim plugin ecosystem. Specifically, we're going to look at three different questions. So, how much did the plugin ecosystem grow during the year? What were the most installed new plugins? And who are the most impactful plugin authors? If you have any predictions on any of these questions, you should type those in the chat right now. But wait a minute, how can we answer these questions? Where does the data come from? So last year I started a project called .file, which is a search engine for Neovim plugins. On .file we have indexed over 1500 Neovim plugins, and you can find the newest plugins here. You can find what plugins have the most installations and which plugins are trending in the community right now. But how do we know how many times a plugin has been installed? Well, on .file you can also upload your Neovim config. So here I've uploaded my config, and you can see I have 39 plugins installed. My plugin manager is Lazy Envim, and some of the plugins I have are Neotree, Plenary, Fidget, etc. And the way we do this is we parse the config file by file and even line by line. And we do a regex match here on what plugins are installed at that specific line of code. So here we can link to exactly that line of code on GitHub. So here we can see how we've identified Harpoon on init.lua line 388, and we can link directly to that GitHub line. The big numbers here are that we have around 1500 plus plugins on .file. We have over 2000 user uploaded Neovim configs and over 70,000 identified plugin installations. And that comes out to an average of around 34 plugins per config. So let's dive into this data, and let's start with a really easy question. What are the top 5 most installed plugins of all time? And here I expect you to recognize all of these plugins. Of course, in the first spot we have Tree Sitter for AST features and syntax highlighting with 1741 installs. In the second place, we have LSP config for adding language servers with 1678 installs. In the third place, we have Plenary, a Lua library used by a lot of other plugins with 1628 installs. In the fourth place, we have Lazy Envim for plugin management with 1572 installs. And in the fifth spot, we have CMP for completion with 1561 installs. And if you remember, we have around 2000 configs on .file. So if you take a look at the numbers here, Tree Sitter is actually installed by over 80% of all the configs on .file, while CMP is installed by over 70% of all the configs. So these 5 libraries, these 5 plugins are all super essential, and they actually represent over 10% of all plugin installations, while the other 1495 plugins represent around 90% of the installations. But okay, you already know about these plugins, you probably have these plugins in your config already. What about newer plugins? Well, let's start at looking at how much the plugin ecosystem grew during the year. So at the end of 2023, there were 916 plugins on .file, and during this year so far, there's been 559 plugins published, and that represents 60% growth in the number of plugins on .file during this year so far. And if you take that down to month, that looks like there are about 60 new plugins published on .file every month. And per day, that's almost 2 new plugins every single day. So if you like working on your config, if you like trying out new plugins, there are a lot of options to choose from. So out of these 559 new plugins, I thought it would be interesting to see which ones were the most popular during the year, which ones got the most installs. And if we take a look at the fifth spot, we have MarkView Envim by Oxy2Dev with 130 installs. And MarkView is a plugin for previewing Markdown files. And on the left-hand side here, you can see the original Markdown file. And on the right-hand side, you can see a formatted preview of that same Markdown. And you can see that it formats several different elements. You can see some headings here, inline code, links, tables, etc. I think it looks very nice. In the shared third spot here, we have Persistence Envim by Folke with 155 installs. Persistence manages sessions, session persistence in Neovim. It automatically saves the active session when you exit, and it allows for easy session restoration through a simple API. Also in the third spot, we have Copilot Chat Envim with 155 installs. Copilot Chat enables interactive chatting with GitHub Copilot from inside Neovim for code explanations and suggestions. And here you can see some different options. So you can, for example, ask Copilot to fix your current code, to generate tests and documentation for your code, or even explain a specific code snippet. In the second spot, we have Render Markdown by Meandering Programmer with 267 installs. Render Markdown improves viewing of Markdown files in Neovim by rendering various Markdown components with customizable options. So here you can see several different components. You can see some headings, code snippets, lists, tables, and checkboxes. I think it also looks quite nice. And in the first spot, we have LazyDev by Folke with 358 installs. So LazyDev is a plugin that helps you configure Lua LS specifically for editing your Neovim config. And it makes you get much faster auto-completion, since only the modules you actually need in the open Neovim file will be loaded. And if you take a look at the graph here, you can see that LazyDev and Render Markdown were quite a bit ahead of the rest of the plugins, while you see it was quite close for the third spot. And if you take a look at how it went during the year, you can see that Copilot Chat was growing quite consistently. You can see that Render Markdown really took off in July, while LazyDev was starting on the top, ending on the top. Persistence was neck in neck here with the Copilot Chat, and they actually ended on the exact same number of installs. And you can see that MarkView started a little bit later, but is gaining quite a lot and might be able to take the third spot here before the end of the year. And if you're on the market for a new plugin, this could be 5 really interesting options to evaluate. Now that we've looked at plugins, I thought it would also be interesting to look at plugin authors and to take a look at who has the most installs aggregated across all their plugins. So if we take a look at the top 5, we can see that we of course have in the number 1 spot Folke with over 7,000 installs and more than twice as many installs as any other plugin author out there. All the top 5 here are of course incredibly impactful, but I feel like this is the way that the community reacts when Folke releases a new plugin. Folke of course has published 15 plugins on .file. Famously here we have Lazy Nvim for plugin management, WitchKey to help you remember your key maps, and Trouble for a beautiful and useful diagnostics. In the second spot, we have TreeSitter with 3 plugins on .file and over 3,000 installs. Of course, TreeSitter is included here, but also a couple of TreeSitter related extensions. In the third spot, we have SteveArc with 8 plugins on .file and 2,300 installs. So the most famous plugins here from SteveArc are Conform, which is a lightweight formatter. We have Dressing Nvim, which improves the default Vim UI interfaces, and Oil Nvim for file exploration. In the fourth spot, we have Eshanovsky with over 25 plugins on .file and over 2,100 installs. Of course, here we have Mini Nvim, which is a Swiss Army knife for Neovim and comes with over 40 independent Lua modules that improve your overall Neovim experience. And several of these Mini Nvim modules are also tracked independently on .file. And in the fifth spot, we of course have Nvim Lua with 1,800 installs. Of course, this is TJ and a lot of other contributors as well. And famously here we have Plenary, the famous Lua library that I feel like almost every single Neovim plugin uses. And we of course have kickstart.nvim here, a launch point for your personal Neovim configuration, and I think extremely popular, and probably a lot of you are using it as well. And if we take a look at the top 5 plugin authors here, they are very impactful for sure, and they represent over 15% of all the plugin installations on .file. And all the other authors, approximately 850 authors, represent a bit over 80% of the plugin installations. And if you take a look at Folke, his plugins represent almost 8% of all the installations just by themselves. Today we've looked at several amazing plugins and plugin authors, but I also want to take a moment to thank all the plugin authors in the community that take their own time and that take a lot of effort into creating amazing plugins. You all make the Neovim community an amazing place. And if you want to dive deeper into some of these plugins that you've heard about today, and you want to explore and find other interesting plugins, I urge you to head over to .file. Thank you very much for your time today. I will be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.